Welcome to Bowpine Legends. Thank you for joining me. So today I'm really excited to share a story with you. It's about a cowboy by the name of Denny Taylor. He lived right on the Canada-US border, on the Canada side, just west of Vesuvius, British Columbia. And although we don't know a lot about him, we've got a couple of stories about him. And they just lead to more intrigue than anything else. Some may qualify him as just a cowboy. Others would lean towards more the outlaw slash gunfighter side of things. So, yeah, he was a friend of my great grandfather's and my grandfather as well, by extension. And Granddad noted a few of his stories, and one of them he's got written down here. I'll tell that one. We've got a couple other short stories we'll throw in there too. But I'll get started with how the family met him. So back in about 1922, my great grandfather Charles Overton, he's living in Chilliwack, British Columbia, and he's got a couple of kids and a wife, and he's got a secondhand store, and he's making an okay go of it at the secondhand store. I think it was selling mainly furniture. Anyways, he buys himself a house. A couple of months later, he finds out that there was a mortgage attached to the house that he wasn't aware of, and he became responsible for the mortgage, and well, it pretty much bankrupted him. So it was time for him to move on. He was looking for for greener pastures, right? And while he was contemplating this, one day, a gentleman walks into his store, and they get to talking, and just so happens that this guy's got a piece of property for sale up near Vesuvius, British Columbia. And he pulls out a map and he shows it to great granddad. And, shows a road, and it's got a nice little lake, good access. On the other side of the lake, there's a small cabin, and then a quarter section of land that goes to the south. And great granddad, he was a cattleman, stockman, horse trader, the whole 9 yards. So this is pretty fitting for him. He thought, yeah, this works. This is meant to be. This guy walks into the store. What a great deal. Let's do this. And so he buys this place, sight unseen. Not sure what he paid for it. Probably wasn't much because he didn't have very much money because he was indebted to this other mortgage. But he buys the place sight unseen and tells his wife and kids to, start getting ready to move. And he heads out ahead of them, and he's going to check this place out, right? Winds up in Nighthawk. Nighthawk is a little border town on the U.S. side, a little mining town. And it's not far from where this property is that he bought. And I would guess that he started out on foot, heading towards his property. So between Nighthawk and his newly acquired property lay the Richter Ranch. And I would imagine he might have stopped in there on his way by, or maybe he just ran into one of the Richter brothers, I'm not sure. But one of them escorted him out to his newly found property. But when they got there, there's a nice beautiful lake, a little cabin on the south side of the lake. And then about 30 yards beyond the cabin, well, that property just went straight vertical. Just nothing but cliffs. From a map looking down, it looked great. Real life. There's no place to have cattle or horses or farm or ranch or anything. So he basically got swindled by this guy. And I believe it was actually one of the Richter brothers that introduced great granddad to Denny Taylor. Denny Taylor had a property that was adjacent to the quarter section that great granddad had bought. And he was interested in the property. And great granddad ended up selling it to Denny for, I think it was 7 milk cows. And great granddad took those milk cows, rented a place up in Fairview, and did all right. But that was the introduction of Charles Overton and Denny Taylor, and by extension, my grandfather, Russell Overton. And I guess Denny liked to tell a few stories about his past. Maybe not a braggart, but there wasn't much else to do back in those days. And I'm going to relate a couple of those stories to you. And you can tell me what you think, where he came from, what he did with his past. So a couple of the stories I just have in my mind that I remember Granddad telling. And the last one that I'll tell is actually documented. He wrote it down, thankfully. I'm not going to read it off the page because, quite honestly, it's hard to read his handwriting at this point in his life. It's pretty shaky, and it just kind of ruins the story if I try and stutter my way through deciphering his language. But I'll tell you the story nonetheless, and then I'll post this probably on the Facebook Bullpine Legends page, and you can read it for yourself if you want. All right, guys. So the first story is about Denny. He was working on a ranch. I believe it was in Texas at the time, and it was a large outfit and prominent outfit. And that outfit had been contacted by a gentleman from Germany. This guy was a big game hunter, and he wanted to come over and explore the Wild West and go on a big game hunt, all the rest. And he was willing to pay the owner of the ranch to do this. So they struck a deal, and the guy got on a boat, and next thing you know, he was in Texas. And Denny Taylor was assigned to take him on an antelope hunt. And that was fine. Denny was a good hunter, apparently. So we saddled up a couple of horses and got the German and his rifle, and away they went out on this hunt. And before long, they came up to a ridge, and Danny crept up the ridge and took a look over the other side, and sure enough, there was a small herd of antelope on the other side of this ridge. So he got the German fellow, and he brought him up, and this guy was just ecstatic. He was living something right out of a novel. He was in the Wild West. He was with a cowboy. He was hunting big game. He was absolutely elated. And he crept up over this ridge with his rifle and got the antelope in his sights, and he just couldn't pull the trigger. He just kept explaining how amazing it was to see these antelope, and he was just awestruck, right? But he wasn't doing the job. He wasn't shooting the antelope. So Denny kept telling him, hey, you gotta shoot. You gotta shoot while you can. Like, they're gonna scatter. They'll catch wind of us and they'll scatter. Anyways, the guy was just too excited. And sure enough, the antelope spooked. Well, Denny had about enough of this hunting and this German guy's being awestruck. And he stood up, pulled out his revolver, and picked off an antelope at about 75 yards. Dropped the thing clean. And well, the German fellow, he thought this was amazing. Like, this just made his story that much better. Not only is he out in the Wild West, and he's on a big game hunt, and he's with a cowboy, but this cowboy just pulled out a 6-gun and shot an antelope right in front of him. Like, what a treasure to take back to Germany, right? So that was one of his first stories, and it kind of alludes to the fact that maybe Denny was pretty handy with a revolver. And the second story here kind of supports that. He was apparently in a saloon one evening, and came out of the saloon. The night was over, kind of thing, and somebody confronted him on the boardwalk outside. And all he would say was that the next morning there was a man full of bullet holes on the boardwalk. He would never admit that he shot anybody or killed anybody, but he alluded to it. So kind of makes you wonder, about his past, right? I know where his homestead was on Kruger Mountain, and I've gone there with a metal detector, and I've looked for shell casings because I thought, what, an old school cowboy, maybe a couple of glasses of whiskey in one night, he's gonna get out and he's gonna let fly with his revolver. He was still known to carry a revolver when he was in Canada, but I haven't found any yet. But I'm gonna keep looking because I'm sure they're out there. It'd be really neat to put a little piece of that history to this story, to actually have a couple of shells. I think that'd be pretty amazing. And then the last short story that I'll share with you about him is, he was making his way up to Canada, and he was going through Oklahoma. And there's a lot of range wars happening in Oklahoma at the time. I think we've all seen the movies where the big rancher pushes out the little rancher, right? Big guy takes over the little guy. And sometimes it wasn't a very pleasant undertaking. Anyways, Denny was um, riding by this ranch one day, and it just happened that there was four family members swinging from a tree outside of the ranch house. And that's just kind of how it was back in those days. So it sounds like Denny, you know, saw a fair bit of stuff. And from the few stories that we do have, it would have been amazing to sit down with this character and actually talk to him and hear some of his stories firsthand. Because if that's the stuff that he let out, I wonder what he kept in, you know? Anyways, the last story is actually kind of a famous story. And this might be a first-hand account of this story. I can't be positive, but this story was perpetuated through the Wild West quite commonly in novels and I think later on even in film. But it's a pretty cool story. So basically, Denny was one of a dozen guys that were working on a ranch, overwintering some cattle on a range somewhere. And they had a decent cookhouse and one big bunkhouse where all 12 of them slept. But, you know, when you put 12 guys into a one room cabin, if you will, stuff's going to happen. You know, people aren't always going to be courteous and polite. And you throw a long winter in there, and well, yeah, there can be some bad blood between people pretty easily, right? And this was the case apparently. So there was an older cowboy. He was in his 40s apparently, and pretty rough and tumble. He got up early one morning, and he saddled his horse and got his kit all together, ready to go out on the range. And there was a young man, 17 years old, which back then that was you're a bona fide man by then, and he was supposed to go out with him. And I don't know, as generations typically do, you know, you think the younger generation's lazy and useless, right? Well, this guy comes into the bunkhouse and he grabs a guy by the feet and he gives him a shake to wake him up. Now, if you've read any westerns or watched any western movies, you know that that's not such a good idea to wake a cowboy by touching him in any form. It's a great way to get shot. Well, young boy, he didn't have a gun on him, but when he sat up, he, you know, let out a, "Leave me alone, you son of a bitch." And the old guy, he didn't like that too much. He just reached down, pulled out his revolver, and shot the kid right between the eyes. That was it. Game over. Didn't think twice. When he snapped out of it, he ran out of the bunkhouse, and jumped on his horse, and took off. Well, the bunkhouse was astir, and everybody's trying to figure out what's going on. And, you know, one of them came to their senses and went, "Hey, you know what? Well, I know where he's going." And he had a little fast brown mare, and he jumped on that mare and took off across the river and down the river about 7 miles to this other ranch house. And he beat him there. And he explained to the rancher what had happened. And, you know, we got to get this guy, right? We got to take this guy in. You got to turn him into the law. So the rancher said, "Yeah, okay, you hide your horse over here in the brush, and you come in the house, and you set yourself up in the bedroom here, and I'll invite him in for breakfast when he gets here. And when he's got his back to you, then you can come in, and you can take him, and we'll hand him over to the law." And that's exactly what they did. The guy came in, acted as if nothing had happened, sat down, started to have breakfast, and this young guy came out and took him to the law, basically, right? And the guy was sentenced. He was there was a small hearing, I guess, and he was sentenced to be hung. And they got him up on the gallows, and either the preacher or the hangman, if you will, more likely the preacher, said to the guy, he said, "You know, do you have any last words?" And this guy said, "Nope, let her rip." And that was it. And they kicked the door open, and that was the end of this guy. This guy's name was Gallagher. And throughout history, there's many references to let her go Gallagher or let her rip Gallagher. It became a bit of a infatuation with dime store novels and whatnot. So that's the origins of that story. It's kind of random that it has a connection to the small town of Vesuvius, British Columbia, but hey, it's got to come from somewhere, right? All right, guys. I think it's kind of a neat story. Let me know what you guys think if you want to hear more like this. I am kind of leaning towards more of an intimate side to these stories, if you will, in the sense that anybody can research a town or an empire or a very prominent family, but it's these little stories that kind of get lost in between things and people don't always talk about. By all means, if you guys have any stories that you'd like me to share, I'm all for it, guys. Feel free to reach out. All right, until next time, please make sure you like and subscribe. That's going to help me out. It doesn't cost you anything. I appreciate it. And we'll see you again soon. Cheers.